Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. So we're going to be looking at 3 ways to drive rapid school improvement. And we're going to jump straight in because I've got loads and loads to show you. So if we jump straight in. So a little bit about me and my background. So my name's Jay Ashcroft. So I taught music after university, so I've worked in schools across Merseyside, did a lot of supply work. And I really love teaching. I love working with children. But the reason that I never sort of stuck at it and went to become a sort of full-time teacher was that I had early exposure to the education system working in schools, and I just saw the bureaucracy and the workload and the admin challenges that teachers are faced with on a day-to-day basis. So for that reason, I went away and took a step away from education and actually took a job at Apple Corporate when I was 23. Very interesting role there. I stayed there for a number of years, and I went on to become one of the top performers within Europe at the company. But part of me always missed working in education and working with students. So after a while there, I took a step closer to coming back into the education market, and I essentially was responsible for selling technology into schools. I oversaw over £2 million worth of Apple technology go into hundreds of schools across northern England. And it was at this stage that I began to see the problem. So I've always loved technology, and I've always loved teaching and learning, and I love working with students. And all through this, I was seeing the big challenge that schools were having. So they were going away and they were spending a lot of money on things like iPads, on computers, on tablets, but it just wasn't having the impact. So in 2014, it led me to found LearnMaker. This is probably where you found out about the webinar. So LearnMaker was founded on the principle that technology should transform how teachers work. It should save time and it should help improve student outcomes. Very, very simple. And LearnMaker is an education consultancy based in Birmingham, but we work nationwide, and since being founded, we've worked with about 200 schools, mainly on the M6 route in London, Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool. We are accredited by Google and Department for Education, and in the past we've worked with Apple as well as the other two there. And I believe that it's important to publish your ideas and share them with the world. So the reason that I got into the sort of education consultancy game was to help make a difference. And earlier this year, I released my second book, which is called Reboot, Why We Need to Rethink the Use of Technology in Education if we are to transform our schools. It's gone on to become a #1 bestseller, and it's available globally from Amazon in hard copy paperback version and on Kindle as well. And what I'm about to talk to you over the next sort of, we'll see how long it goes, but probably about 45 minutes, is I want to talk about some of the principles of how you really drive school improvement and how technology plays a big part of that. And this isn't just theory or ideas that I've come up with. This has been sharpened by working with real schools out there in the UK, and it's real proof of concept. And just to overview some of those. So last year I worked with Invicta Primary School. The ideas and the principles that I'm going to share with you in this webinar have enabled those guys to go on to save £30,000. This is per year within their first 12 months. Their leadership team are saving 4 hours per week. Classroom teachers are saving almost an hour per week, and we expect to see that grow. And from everyone who works in the school, the feedback was 100% that technology has enabled them to improve their school performance. So this is key. So we're not talking about student engagement, which is a term that's often bandied around when you come to technology. We're actually focused on school improvement. So the things that really matter, so your attainment, your progress, your levels, or whatever it is that you're measuring against, technology should improve against those real tangible aspects. Second school, Broad Green School, based in Liverpool, large international school. Their project was a little bit different, but working with those guys for 3 months, we enabled them to increase their GCSE maths performance by 25%, reduce their marking cycle from 2 weeks to 2 days, And in that process, they increased student-to-teacher interactions by 300%. That meant students and teachers could have a better dialogue at a much faster rate because we digitized that process. And I'll be talking about how you can do that in your own school a little bit later in this webinar. And finally, Park Royal School, primary school based in the Cheshire area of England. They've gone on to save £20,000 within their first 12 months from a number of areas. Their staff are saving around 3 hours per week each, their leadership team. And they've actually been able to reduce a number of their after-school meetings to the extent that one of the meetings that used to take place every sort of 2 weeks and have sort of 6 to 10 people attending it, sort of leadership meeting, now no longer needs to take place because that work is being done consistently in the background because of the use of technology. And this brings us on to our first key point. So when we want to look at driving school improvement, we want to first sort of hone in on what the actual challenge is. And we can look at this problem here by really taking some perspective about how we actually develop an organization. So, whether this is a school or a business or a sports team, it's quite consistent across all three. And there are only 3 tangible ways to develop an organization. The first one is that you can rely on people. So you have better people, more skilled, talented individuals working in that organization. They will drive results to a higher degree. Second element is resources. So if you have better tools and resources at your disposal, then that should mean that results and performance should be higher. And then the third way is actually technology. So technology should enable people to achieve more, and it should enable your people to get more out of the resources that you've got. Now, when it comes to traditional school improvement, one of the building blocks is actually missing, and it's technology. And traditional school development relies on people and on resources. Now, if you have a constant stream of money coming in, this isn't so much of a challenge because you can continually recruit the best people. You can pay people more so they can stay. You could hire more staff, so you've got more people actually in the school working, and the same on the resources side. So if you can bring in new resources, better learning content, classroom technology, devices, tablets, coding hardware, field trips, minibuses, whatever it is, ways to engage your students. If you can keep pumping money into those 2 aspects, then actually you can sort of paper over the fact that you might not need technology. The challenge is that when the money stops coming in regularly, you then have a problem, because when you rely on people and resources to drive your school's development, when you can't continually increase and invest in those, then development actually stops. And this is the challenge that we're seeing in education right now. So if we think about technology and the ways that's going to enable us to drive school improvement, the first thing we need to do is actually sort of rephrase what technology is. So technology in the dictionary definition, and this is from the Oxford Dictionary, is the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes. Now this is quite important, I think, and especially the practical purposes side of things. So technology is not about the devices or the tablets or computers or whatever we've come to think that technology is in our modern lives. It's actually about enabling people to do better work, or to make things easier, or to connect things together. And this is pretty clear when we go to Google and we actually search, and if you search what technology is, one of the top pictures that comes up is actually this. So it's an intangible picture, ideas, connection, stuff like that. You can't look at that picture and put your finger directly on what technology is. And in its truest sense, that's what it is. And if we were to sum it up in context to a school, we would say that technology is the systems used to manage and identify trends in school data, or it's the platforms used to mark, collate, and feedback on student work. You might also look at it and think it's a system used to collect and collate information. You can use it to deliver learning content, and then finally it's the systems that staff and students might use to communicate and share work together. So it's not any one tangible thing. So technology is the bits and the pieces within the school, so the software, the platform, the systems, that essentially connect things together and enable people to carry out tasks. Now, if we look at this slide, this is what most people would think that technology is. And, you wouldn't be wrong in the fact that computers are technology, devices, whether it's an iPad, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop PC. In our modern world, this is what we think of as technology. But when we think about it in the sort of organizational development sense of the word, these are actually resources. So computers, iPads, tablets, interactive whiteboards, you might have coding hardware, anything else that's sort of a physical, tangible product is actually more akin to being a resource within education. And if we come back to the beginning, traditional school development is forgetting technology. So we're relying on people and we're relying on resources. The technology, the bit that connects this all together, isn't actually there. And this creates a bit of a problem for us. So lack of technology creates three problems, essentially. So the first one is that it creates a lack of time. So when tasks need to be carried out, if you don't have technology to help you, it's a manual, time-intensive process. Teachers and support staff and school leaders have to put their own time and energy into carrying out processes. And we'll look at those a little bit later on into this webinar. The second element is that it creates a lack of money. So when you rely on people and resources, there's no way to become more efficient or more productive or sort of save money in the process. So a lack of technology means that you're always plowing money into people, you're always plowing money into resources, and eventually this is going to run out. And especially when you're relying on the government for your own funding, you can't create new revenue streams very easily. Money can quickly run out. And the third and final problem that it creates is that it actually creates headaches within the school. So the technology that you have, this is, what we think of as technology, but it's actually resources. So if you think about your computers, your iPads, your tablets, your interactive whiteboards, the lack of technology in the platforms and the systems that connects those together within the school actually means that they don't work that well. So that might mean that they're slow to boot up and to load. It might mean that you can't access files and folders sometimes when you use them. It means that they might not integrate, so work that's used on, let's say, an iPad can't be opened on a PC. The interactive whiteboard software might not work on the desktop computers somewhere else. So it creates headaches for staff. So when you need to pick up these resources, these iPads, these computers, sometimes and oftentimes when I talk to schools is that there's challenges there for the teachers. It doesn't always work as it should, and that's due to the lack of technology connecting it. Now that we've identified the challenges and the three big problems we're faced in education, we want to look at the flip side. So what's the solution? And it doesn't need to be this way. So even though there's a lot of challenges within education, it's actually quite simple to solve it by bringing technology in and making schools happy, productive, exciting places to work once again, and escape that sort of drudgery and stress and workload that are sort of dominating education at the moment. And there's a easy roadmap to follow that I've developed for schools. And that's that when you're looking for using effective technology, you want to look at using it in three key principles. And these are that you want to use technology to improve the capability of your staff. You want to use technology to improve the productivity of your school. And then finally, you want to improve the consistency of your lessons. And it's important that you follow these three. So when you want to improve the capability of staff, this means that existing staff become more effective in their jobs because you give them new ways to work and new tools to use. Now, most teachers work, 50 to 60 hours a week. So there's not really space or time within their working life to begin mastering this new technology. So it's all well and good buying in new platforms, new systems, and giving them new ways to work. But if we don't actually save some time and save some energy for them and create a space where they can go away and learn it, it's just not going to impact. So that's why after you improve the capability of your staff, that's why the next stage you need to improve the productivity of your school. So you need to have technology pick up the time-intensive, repetitive processes to create time and space. by doing that, you enable staff to go away and learn new ways to work, to have some reflective time, to begin trialing new things and exploring new ideas. And that's where the third element comes in, and that's that you want technology to improve the consistency of lessons. It's no good giving people new ways to work and creating time and space for them if what they go away and achieve with that isn't consistent with what the school wants to achieve. So the aim is that you want to drive the quality of your lessons. Really interesting fact about consistency within UK education. So when we think about improving our education system, we think about it on a school by school basis, and we go away and we think, well, if we can improve all the schools in this area, then actually education will rise, and we think about improving the whole school. And actually, when you dive into the research and you look at it, the real key to improving the education system is actually to improve consistency at the classroom level. So consistency is greater. Consistency varies to a larger degree from two different classrooms in the same school than it varies in two schools in the same area. So that's to say that there's a bigger difference in the quality of learning going on in classrooms in the same school than there is at a school level in two separate schools. So the key then to actually improving the whole education system is not to focus on improving school by school, but it's actually to focus on improving the consistency between classrooms in the same schools. And that's the third element that technology should be used for, is to really focus in and hone on improving that consistency, so that you're not leaving quality to chance. You've got control over it. Now, this isn't to say that we should sort of impose a sort of business model on schools or bring that corporate world thinking in, which this kind of looks like. It's quite stuffy. It's not exciting in the sense that a lot of the the technology resources that in schools are. It's actually to try and learn from it. So I have a quite unique background in the fact that I've worked in education for a long while, but I've also had a successful corporate career in one of the highest performing companies in the world. And what I want to do is bring some of those mindsets and those principles about how they drive the performance in a company like Apple and actually apply them into education. It's not a sense of applying a business model into schools, because I couldn't think of anything worse. The last thing you want to do is to kill creativity or that passion. What you actually want to do with it is you want to kill the sort of paperwork and the admin that's sucking the creativity and the passion out of education for teachers. And by looking at how businesses do that and get the best out of their staff, you can actually learn quite a lot, and you can apply that into schools, and you can enable teachers to sort of get freedom, whether they're a classroom teacher or a school leader, gain a bit of freedom from that paperwork, from that administration, and begin using technology to really drive classroom practice, creativity, and teaching and learning, and the engagement piece with the students. And that's what I really want to achieve through my work with LearnMaker and in education in general. So now I want to jump in to each of these principles in more detail and give you some tangible things that you can actually do. So I'm just going to take a drink 1 second. And to get started straight away, we want to look at the first principle, and that's how we improve the capability of our staff. And this is summed up really by we want to use technology so that we give staff new ways in which to work. And by doing that, we'll be able to improve how effective they are in their roles. And I always say to schools, if you want to improve your school performance, it's actually quite simple. You just need to improve how your staff are able to perform. And that's the challenging bit. So if we focus on this first and foremost, we can draw on some research and some of the things that schools are actually saying, areas that they want to improve on. So if we look at the most recently published workload survey from the Department for Education, so it's a few years old, so 2013. But if we look at the top 3 reasons, the top 3 things that people fed back on that what would improve the quality of teaching and learning. 3 real key categories. So the first one, you have to forgive me for the typo I've just spotted. So discussing work with individual pupils, 30% of teachers feel that if they could do that more often, then teaching and learning would improve. 28% of teachers want one-to-one and small group teaching opportunities, and 26% believe that collaborative planning with colleagues would drive the quality of teaching and learning. So let's jump right in and look at how technology can actually impact in these areas and really improve and enable people to achieve more of this. So the first thing we're going to look at is tackling points 1 and 2. So we want to improve the discussion of work with individual pupils, and we want to enable small group teaching more often. And the platform that we can use to achieve this is Google Classroom. So this is part of Google Suite for Education, which is a free platform that schools can sign up to and use. And through Google Classroom, it enables you to create your own classes. You distribute assignments digitally through Google Classroom. You can mark them and you can give feedback and you can record notes through the platform. It puts all those details into a markbook and it's all archived and referenced, so it meets all statutory requirements. One of the things that a lot of school teachers and leaders say to me when I talk to them about digitizing any of the workflows around teaching and learning is that they worry it's not going to be sort of Ofsted ready or it's not going to meet their statutory requirements. From the exposure I've had to Ofsted and the schools that have done this, it's actually proved very popular. Ofsted in the new framework are now looking at how you act upon the data that you're using. It's not just a matter of collecting it and evidencing anymore. They want to see what you're doing to act upon that. And by digitizing that data, it actually makes it very easy to view, very easy to look up, and you can see the clear progression. So in Google Classroom, the markbook, for example, each student, you can dive right in and you can see assignment by assignment what they've achieved in the spreadsheet. So it's very easy to see the trend there, whether the students learning and their results are going up or whether they're sort of stagnant or whether they're not improving, and then you can act upon that. So from a school readiness piece, the Department for Education and Ofsted, digitizing assessment is actually a real big step forward. And it will save your teachers a lot of time and effort as well. So let's look at how this has been used in a real life context. So I'm going to jump right in. So one of the real benefits of using something like Google Classroom or just generally digitizing the assessment process is that when the teacher sets an assignment, students in that class can use the instant messaging tools that these platforms use. So this is Google Classrooms, and they can communicate after the lesson time. And this is really key. So what we've got here is just a brief screenshot of a much longer conversation that went on. And this was from Mrs. O'Brien's Year 6 English Booster Group in their school. So these were the students who needed some extra lessons, some extra tuition as they came up to taking their SATs tests. And there was a group of about 10 to 12 of them, I think. I can't remember specifically. And what was happening here was that they would meet once a week. They'd be set a piece of work in the lesson time and some homework, and they'd take that away and work on it and bring it back. So what we did instead was that we set them up on Google Classroom, and we distributed the work through that, and we saw what happened afterwards. And this is what did happen. So the work was set, and then students started a conversation with one another. So we can have a look at this and dive right into what's happening. So the first thing is that students are engaged and communicating about learning outside of the classroom. So while some of this takes place within classroom, a lot of these conversations happen after school or at the weekend. And that's really key, because when we're setting work paper-based and it's all face-to-face, that's really important for learning, but it's time constrained. You want learning to continue after school into the weekend. You want it to happen when and where it needs to. And if you give students a platform to use like Google Classroom, then that can happen. It's very easy to. They can log in from any device they've got. As long as they've got an internet connection, they can access their work and they can be in that community and talk to one another. The second thing that is happening is that it's creating a deep group discussion, and this discussion is recorded and evidenced. So when I speak to schools and they want to raise teamwork and group work, the big challenge has always been about how do you evidence that? How do you know what students are inputting on a project? Is one doing all the work and three just sort of coasting? How do you give feedback and attach, an effort reward or performance review to that for those students? So right here, we've got a really clear idea of who's taken part, and it's recorded in evidence. So if Ofsted or the Department for Education needed to see this, it's completely ready, and it's referenced and it's archived. And the third and final thing that's happening, which is most important, is that students are actually helping one another to learn. And this is a huge breakthrough, because in this class, and I hope the school doesn't mind me saying this, that the students aren't that friendly to one another. The students who are underperforming, they can be quite mean. There's not that collaborative community spirit there between these students, and they generally just don't like school. They're the type of students who will ask, why are we learning this? Learning's boring. I think every school has these and has dealt with them, and it's about engaging them in the right way. So if we take a deeper look about how this has happened through Google Classroom, when we look at the same screenshot, it's really interesting when we highlight certain things. So the first thing we can notice is that, Mr. O'Brien, we've highlighted the teacher here. So what's happened is that Mr. O'Brien set the work. The students are getting on with it. And then after a time, she's gone away and she's asked them about what did they find easy or difficult about it. Now, the interesting thing that's happened is that, as the students begin to feedback about whether they found it easy or hard, and specifically what was challenging for them, you can see that these are the parts that have been highlighted in yellow. Mrs. O'Brien has then been able to assess what they found challenging and then give them some follow-up resources. So in this case, she's gone away and she's found a YouTube video. She's given that to the students, and you can see where it's highlighted, she's given the link there. Brooks then come in and he said, I watched the video with my brother and it's really helpful. Marcus has replied, that video helped me a lot. Now, a little while later into this conversation, as the messages are whizzing by, Vera comes in and she says, I found that adverb question hard because I wasn't sure if away was an adverb. And then this is where the magic starts happening. So Grace Angel replies that I found the last question most difficult because I don't understand how to do determinators. To which Vera replies, I don't know what they are, but I think these are words like a, the, because. They specify it. And this dialogue is opening up between students. And it's at this stage that Brooke jumps into the conversation and says, Miss gave Marcus this link because he was struggling too. I'll give you the link. And Brooke then pops in the link that earlier Mrs. O'Brien had shared with them. And this is a huge breakthrough, because this is students working together, sharing knowledge, and actually curating content to one another. Now Mrs. O'Brien's in this chat and she can oversee it, and she can choose when to jump in and when not to. And this happened outside of school, so it was after hours in the evening. But if this platform wasn't in place for the school, then none of this can happen. And if we actually have a look at the before and the after, so with this group in particular, beforehand, before using Google Classroom, when work was paper-based and homework was all on paper, a lot of the students were unengaged. When asked, students would say they were typically bored in school. They would say, why do we need to learn this? These kind of things that happen in a lot of lower set ability classrooms. And generally there was little kindness towards one another. So there was name calling, students weren't that friendly to one another. It wasn't a very nice environment for them, as is typical in these sorts of settings. Now, once Google Classroom's gone in there and students are using it and Mrs. O'Brien's leveraging that, students are engaged. So they're working in the evenings and they're working on the weekends. They're not being asked to. They don't have to do this, but they're choosing to. They're engaged with the learning. And then more importantly, they're helping one another. They're communicating and they're sharing knowledge. So this is, we're diving into the realms of metacognition here with Year 6 children, but they're becoming aware of what they know, what they don't know, and more importantly, how they can help one another learn these concepts. And this is essentially where we want to get to with, all classes. And just by creating the space, creating that community that the Google Classroom allows, it enables Mrs. O'Brien and those students to work in a way that wasn't before possible on paper. When we come back to our workload survey, so discuss and work with individual pupils, well, yeah, we can do that through a platform like Google Classroom because there's that instant messaging ability. We can do it to a much deeper level. One-to-one and small group teaching. Well, this is a perfect example because it's a small booster group preparing for exams. I think there's 10 to 12 children in this. So it's enabling Mrs. O'Brien in the school to do both of these things in droves. And it's been very successful. So this brings us on to the third element. So if we can improve collaborative planning, then we should be able to improve the quality of teaching and learning. So if we jump into this question, so the first thing we need to look at is, so what is actually stopping staff working more collaboratively? And the answer is simple. It's the physical constraints of the school timetables. There just isn't the time or the space. And sometimes there isn't actually the physical space in the school. There's no meeting rooms. I've worked in a lot of schools where you just grab space when and where you can. And it's not that conducive to doing deep, meaningful planning. If you're having to work in the staff room and some of the other staff might be on the break and relaxing, and you're in the other corner trying to really plan some deep, detailed work, it's not the perfect environment to do this sort of thing. So collaborative working is quite a challenge in a lot of schools that I meet. And we can learn some lessons. So if we look outside of our own education system and we look to other borders. So one of my favorite things to read up upon is about the Finnish education system, because I think it's fascinating because it's this very small country. They don't spend huge amounts on their education system. Actually, we spend a lot more per pupil than schools in Finland. But they achieve these incredible results. So in Western society and Western countries, Finland typically top it out. So, as much has been made about sort of Shanghai, Singapore methods of learning. But sometimes I feel that the cultural differences between those countries and Europe is probably too great to take too much from it. There's obviously a lot we can learn from Shanghai and Singapore, but I think it's better to look at countries like Finland and Canada that have more similar Western cultures, but are really outperforming the sort of level they spend, because the UK spends more per pupil than both Finland and Canada do. And it's really interesting when we start delving deep into the Finnish system about what the actual differences are. And I think there's three, especially in how teachers work together, that makes a real big difference for them. So in Finland, the average teacher spends 600 hours a year in the classroom. Contrast that with the UK, and our teachers are spending 960 hours on average in the classroom. PPA in Finland is always scheduled with other teachers. It's quite rare to have PPA time alone. In England, in the UK in general, PPA is scheduled whenever it can fit around the school timetable. And finally, there's a huge culture in Finland about team teaching. So usually teachers will have another colleague in lessons with them, supporting them and helping them, 1 or 2 times a week minimum. And a lot of their professional development is built around actually going out and observing other schools and working with other educators and sort of learning from experience. Whereas in England, that same sort of development system is based more around moderation and evaluation. So teachers are sort of judged and assessed, and then they're given development points they need to action and how they need to learn. And we typically have a culture of whole school inset days where, there's 30 to 40 staff in a session. It's a sort of catch-all. It's not very bespoke. It's not very personalized to individual needs, because when you put 30 people in a room, it just simply can't be. And if we look at those 3 things, then you can see there's a huge gulf between the 2 systems. And we can see that, there's a lot of things we can take from the Finnish system, but what we can't take is we can't physically replicate any of those good things we're doing, because we have timetable limitations. If we go back to this slide, we simply can't have our teachers teaching 600 hours, because how would we get around those other 360 hours that classes run for in the UK? So we can't physically replicate a lot of the good things that they're doing, which led me to the idea that, well, if we can't physically replicate it, why can't we digitally replicate it? And we actually can with the platforms that are online and available now. And the biggest one to look at is actually Google Docs. So a lot of this talk is about how Google Suite for Education can improve your school. And there's plenty of ways to work collaboratively online, but I quite like Google Suite for Education because it's one platform that offers a range of tools. It's easy to use and it's available from any device. So you can log in whether you're in a laptop, a desktop, a tablet, an iPad, your phone, whatever you've got. As long as you've got internet, you can get online. Good thing about Google Docs is that you've got full revision history. So one thing that teachers get worried about, or school leaders, when I've worked with them, is that they worry about if they create a document and they invite somebody else to edit it, they might just come in and delete all the good stuff they've done, or they might change it, and they might not want that. So with full revision history, that means that every time there's a major change, you can revert back and you can go back to that previous version. So if people make changes or they delete all the content, for example, by mistake or on purpose, you've always got that safety net where you can just go into the revision history tab and you can revert back to any previous save. And the saves happen in the background. You don't have to do them. Every time there's a major change, Google automatically saves it. And the best thing is it's it's easy to share. Excuse me. So you don't need to print it out. You don't need to download it from the C drive or from your USB stick. It lives online, so you just literally invite people to the document and you can get up and running straight away. And if we look at a real life example of this, so this is from Invicta Primary School. So in Invicta, so if staff are in different locations, it doesn't stop collaboration anymore. So this is a real life example. So when they were developing their marking policy, a number of staff needed to input on this and work together. And if we just take an example, so Marie, the executive head, she might be out working while she's at a conference, grabbing a break, or at the lunchtime, she can open up a laptop, log in and see what changes have been made. Vicky is the head of the school. She might be sat upstairs in her office working on it. And then you've got Lindsay, the ICT coordinator. She might be at home, she's got a day off or whatever, but she's not on site, she's not with Marie or Vicky, but she can still input. And the good thing about Google Docs is that, multiple people can input on this. It's not limited to 3. I forget the limitation, but it's something crazy like 30 or 40, so you can have a whole class in there at once. You wouldn't do that at a leadership level. But this is great for leaders, it's great for the classroom, because you're building that collaboration. So the impact for this at Invicta was that, 3 months later, so their school leaders, they're now saving 4 hours each per week. So significant time savings, almost an hour a day. And as a result, they're able to better collaborate together. And that collaboration will eventually, drive the performance of that school forward. They'll either be able to make decisions quicker, identify trends quicker, or simply work together to a high quality. So very powerful stuff. And when we come back to our workload survey, well, just the 2 pieces of software, so Google Classroom and Google Docs, using these together, we can create more time so that teachers can discuss individual work with pupils. We can create one-to-one and small group teaching environments more easily. And we can improve how much collaborative planning happens with colleagues. So all very powerful. From that, we're going to move on to principle number 2, which is about improving the productivity of our school. So we've given staff new ways to work with things like Google Classroom and Google Docs. Now it's about reducing the burden of paperwork and administration, so that we enable our staff to focus on what's most important. And to dive right into this, so it's really interesting when you look about where does the time go. So again, this is from the Department for Education's workload survey. So if you look at it, so the average teacher, so this is primary school teachers, results were almost similar for secondary schools, just a little bit less on each one. So the average primary school teacher teaches 59.3 hours per week. So it doesn't teach, works 59.3 hours per week. But only 19 hours are spent in the classroom. Almost 23 are spent on PPA. But when we look at pure administrative and paperwork-driven tasks, we can see that classroom teachers are spending 17.2 hours of their week on this. And that's almost a third. So it's 29% of a classroom teacher's time in primary school is spent on admin. So we need to solve this challenge, really, because if we can reduce the time that teachers are saving on administration, one of two things will happen. Either teachers will be better rested, come to work more motivated, improve the quality of their work because they've got more energy, they're more focused, they're happier, they're more content in their roles. Or what I see happen quite a lot is that teachers are very passionate and they like to input on their students' learning. So the time they spend from administration that they save, they reinvest that in teaching. So they go away and they spend more time planning, they create better quality lessons, they have more in-depth conversations with their student, their work becomes more differentiated, all these good things. So in either scenario, actually reducing the amount of administration leads to a really great result either way that goes. So let's look at how technology actually enables us to do this. And to jump into this, we want to look a bit about what I call the flow of information theory. So the reason that admin and paperwork has become sort of all-consuming and has got a little bit out of hand in schools is that it's the flow of information theory. And because everything's paper-based, there's essentially 3 steps when information is flowing around the school. So the first one is that you have to create the documents. And we'll look at a real-life example of this in a minute, so you have to bear with me for the theory part. So let's imagine we're creating a field, we've got a field trip coming up, and we want students to, we need to get parental, we need the parents to return a yes or no parental guidance slip whether the students can attend or not. So the first stage is that somebody in the school has to create that document. They have to type it up and they have to print it out. That takes time and energy. At stage 2, so sorry, the other stage of stage 1 is that that's given to all the students. They take it home and the parents sign it. And then we get to stage 2. Stage 2 is you have to manually collect these responses. So you might have to manually collect 300 returns. You've got to put them into a pile of yes and no's and sift through them. You've got to check that all the parents have received the letter, or that at least all the parents have replied within the time frame. So sometimes you might have to send out a second letter, which puts you back to stage number 1, where you've got to create more letters and send them out. And once you've finished collecting them, it takes time and energy itself. Somebody then has to curate them. So by that I mean, you have to sift through the piles with the yes and no's, you have to type them up, and typically they have to go to a senior leadership member who signs it off, and then you've got a finalised list of the students who will be going on that trip. And that takes time and energy again. And this is what happens when everything's paper-based. And in a sort of inconspicuous example, such as something as simple as getting sign off for a field trip from the parents, there's actually a lot of work in here. Now, if we use the flow of information theory and we look at a digital-based environment, so at the moment it's paper, when we move to a digital-based environment, you can actually see that there's only one step involved now. So when we create the data capture, so let's imagine we create an online form. Somebody has to write that up, they create it. They then send that link out to the parents, and then technology does the rest. So technology collects those responses, the parents reply, the technology puts them in a spreadsheet, and then that spreadsheet can be, you can separate the yes and no replies. So the technology again is curating it, and then that goes straight to the SLT and they sign it off. And through that process, that means nobody needs to manually collect the responses on paper, and nobody needs to manually curate the responses. And that creates more time and energy. And that time and energy can be reinvested into what's important for your school. Now, if we look at the actual platforms that enable us to do this, excuse me a second, I've got a dry throat. Google Forms is a great piece of software. So again, there's a lot of online survey, web-based survey collecting tools out there, but I think Google Forms is a really good one. It's part of Google Suite, so if you use Google Suite and use Classroom and Docs, which you've already looked at, it's all quite similar. So once you get the hang of one, you generally can use all the apps in Google Suite. So it makes sense that we stick to Forms. It enables us to digitally capture feedback. One of the useful things is that if you wanted to use it in the classroom, you can actually you can create quizzes that auto-mark. So students can get instant feedback on the answers that they're given. And most importantly, so the information is stored and you can automatically analyze it. So you don't need to type it up, you don't need to collate it, you don't need to run any analysis on it. It sits there in a spreadsheet, and at the click of a button, you can simply sort it or analyze it however you want. It's really, really powerful. So if we take that example of booking a field trip, when we're paper-based, it's actually a really difficult process. And when you process it out step by step, you can see how time-consuming and intensive it is. So here I've done it on the slide. And I won't go through all of them, but basically you can see from the beginning, you type up the field trip consent form, you print them off, give them out to form leaders. Form leaders give the letters to their students, so on, and it's very time consuming. I won't go through all of them, you can read them at your own pace. But finally, by the time it's passed to the SLT to sign off and the field trip's ready to go, you've covered 19 steps in this workflow. And that's just something as simple as getting parental consent for a field trip. Now, if we look at the same process, but we actually use a digital platform like Google Forms to get that parental consent, that same process, you can see we actually lose most of the steps here. So we've gone from 19 steps to simply 6 steps. It's a huge, huge time saver and energy saver for the people involved. But I think one of the things that's most important is that when you use something like Google Forms and you collect it digitally, teachers don't actually need to be involved in the process at all. And this is really important because teachers' best skills is teaching and working with the students. It's not admin and paperwork and collecting information. So whenever you can use technology to remove those jobs and those tasks from them, it's only going to reap rewards because they're either free of doing that task and they can reinvest it in working with the students, or they can go away and they can refuel and get re-energized and come back the next day with more motivation and raise the quality of their work. So that concludes that's how we improve the productivity of the school. And then finally, this brings us on to improving consistency of lessons. So we give our staff new ways to work, we've given them new capabilities, we've saved them time and energy by using technology to pick up a lot of the admin and paperwork tasks. So now it's really important that we focus the use of technology on actually driving the consistency of lessons, because like I mentioned earlier, consistency between classroom and classroom in the same school, it's greater than at a school to school level. So the secret to really improving a school is making sure everyone's consistently performing at the level that you want as a school leader. And there's just a simple principle that you can follow here. So quality follows consistency. So you can't control the quality of your teaching and learning in your classrooms until you first control the consistency in there. And this is all about making sure you don't leave consistency to chance. So when organizations are looking to develop and improve, you put processes and systems in place, but you have transparency. And transparency is really, really important, from leadership to teachers down to the admin. Because when you have transparency, staff know what they're working towards. And one of the questions to ask yourself is that at each level, do staff know what outstanding work looks like? And do they know what they should be working towards? So do the admin staff know what a great job looks like? Do all your teachers in every classroom know what outstanding lessons look like in their own subject and their own, their own topics? And do senior leaders know what outstanding leadership, outstanding school drive and development looks like? Outstanding coaching and professional development. So it's really key to drive this consistency across the organization, and not leave it to chance. You really want to define it. And so from the work I've done with schools, I've come across a key insight when it comes to consistency, and that is that most school leaders don't know what resources are being used in the classroom. So if you were to stop this, if I was to ask you to stop this webinar and actually tell me what's being used in the classes, tomorrow in school, the likelihood is that you wouldn't know. And this has come from two areas. So the first one is that we want a lot of freedom and creativity in education, and this is really important. So when we're talking about consistency and control, this is not a case of actually prescribing specific learning resources and making it really ironclad about what teachers can and can't use. It's actually about explaining to teachers and showing them exemplars of what's expected of them. Because the other thing I find is that most teachers don't know what is expected of them when it comes to the lesson and learning quality. So teachers work to what they think is a great lesson, but that is about perspective. Is a seasoned teacher who's been working 25 years in education, is their idea of an outstanding lesson, is that the same as an NQT who's 6 months into their new role? It's not, and it varies widely. And if you don't take control of that as a school leader, then you're never going to be able to control the quality. And I've found that in conventional schools, quality is being left to chance every day. So, teachers develop and pick a lot of their own resources. School leaders aren't really sure what's happening, aren't really sure what resources are in use on a day-by-day in their class. And teachers don't know what's expected of them. So tangibly, it's all well and good saying we want outstanding learning, but what is outstanding learning? What does an outstanding lesson look like? What are the resources that you use? What are the conversations that happen? These things need to be defined, because if they're not defined, then people simply can't work to them. So this brings us to how do we actually drive transparency? And again, we can do this with Google Drive. So one of the other applications in Google Suite for education. So Google Drive is online cloud storage based. So it works on any device. It's available whenever you need it, and it's easy to share. So it sort of replaces your school server. You run them side by side. What I use with a lot of schools is that the Google Drive becomes the learning resource center. So staff can go in and they can get the resources that they need. They can be shared easily, stuff like that. And so this is really important. We'll work from a real life example again. So if we visit Park Royal, so we did this with Park Royal over a 3-month period. But when we went to the school, we found that, even though you've got the server in the school and you've got the folders, in the true sense of sort of sharing resources, they actually, we didn't have any learning resources shared in the school. So they had, they had their own curriculums developed and stuff like that. But when we go around, we're finding that from classroom to classroom, the lesson plans they were bespoke to that classroom, but they've been changed from what the school had brought in. And while that seems like a good idea, it's great to customize it bespoke to your students, but if you don't have a level of control over that, then again, you're leaving that consistency to chance. So what happened at Park Royal is that over a period of 3 months, we helped them move all their content into Google Drive. So this meant that learning content that was, so the content was previously stored paper-based, so it was in filing cabinets. It was on hard drives on laptops, and it was scattered on sort of USB sticks and drives. And now all that content is in one place. It's in Google Drive. And that means that all school staff can access it and they can refine upon it. And I think this is quite important, especially in a primary setting where teachers will move around year groups. So what was happening, we found, was that so if a year 6 teacher moved to year 2 or year 3, they were having to go away over the summer and they would have to create, a whole new load of resources, because while some of the existing year 6, some of the existing year 2 or 3 resources were shared with this member of staff, a lot of the resources that the teachers were using in that year group was, it was paper-based, or it was stored on hard drives or USB sticks. So it wasn't easy to gather it all up, and it wasn't easy to pass it across. So whenever teachers had to cover a different year group, it was creating a huge amount of extra work for them. And as we've looked earlier, time is time is really key in schools. Teachers are working almost 60 hours a week in primary setting, 55 hours in secondary. And this has led to the rise of, downloadable worksheets and sites that offer these. And this, I think, is quite a big danger to schools, the danger of downloadables. And this is a real life example. So one of the things that happened in Park Royal is that, when we started bringing all these resources in, we were able to input a sort of a quality control audit. So the leadership were able to define what they thought, what they wanted as good and outstanding learning to look like. And this meant that when the resources came in and they didn't match these definitions, then the school leadership could have the relevant conversations and they could support those staff and help them develop and improve upon their practice. And what we found, or what the leadership found at Park Royal, was that, so this worksheet, so it had been downloaded off one of the internet sites, and according to the website, it was an outstanding worksheet for a year 6 science class. Now, when the school leadership looked at it and they looked at their own development plan and what they wanted to do with the curriculum, it was not an outstanding lesson plan, and it had, I doubt whether it ever had been, because there's very little quality control. But this had been in use in the school for a number of months, and the teacher who was using it, they hadn't done it deliberately. They didn't know this was the case, but they'd gone to this website where it came from. They'd look for outstanding resources. This one came up and they downloaded it, not realizing that it might not have been vetted, it might not meet the school's requirements, because from the teacher's perspective, they didn't have time to develop the new resources. They didn't have the energy, and they needed something to use then and there. So they turned to the only thing that is available. It's the path of least resistance, which most people take. So if we look at when we started pulling all these shared resources at Park Royal, at the beginning of April, there's no transparency. And we actually found that inadequate downloaded worksheets were in use in certain classrooms. So consistency was being left to chance here. And then by July, so we've gone from a situation where there was no shared resource to 30,000 teaching and learning resources. There's now full transparency. So school leaders can see what's happening, they can see what resources are in use in the classroom, and they can coach and mentor teachers to raise their teaching and learning. This stuff isn't happening in isolation, and they can proactively manage this. And that's key, really, because when you can proactively identify problems and correct them, it reduces the impact that it has on the students. Students not going to fall behind as much, learning is going to progress faster for them, and they're going to hit the targets that the school set out, whether that's test-based attainments or whether it's something else and more holistic. And when we spoke to the school head teacher, from this technology, they've been able to implement strategies far quicker into their school, and it's definitely impacted on learning, is the feedback. And it's quite interesting is that, so within the last few months, the school have actually gone through an Ofsted grading, and although it doesn't directly reference the technology as it wouldn't, you can pick up little hints of it. So some of the things pulled out from the Ofsted report was that school leaders have successfully arrested a decline in the school's performance. So that's much easier to achieve when you have full transparency. You can identify areas that are not meeting the levels of performance that you want, and you can do something about them before that performance dips. Secondly, the quality of teaching, learning, and assessment is now good overall. That's something they've been able to drive because they've been able to identify where teaching and learning isn't good, and they've been able to impact on that. And then finally, so school leaders and governors have very good understanding of the school's strengths and weaknesses. And again, this comes from greater transparency. So when you can see more of what's happening, you've got more data, and you've got more information to use, you can see where you're strong and you can see where you're weak, and you can spend time and energy solving those weaknesses. So this brings us on to why we need to look at technology in the first place. So we've looked at three sort of principles. We've looked at capability of staff, we've looked at productivity of the school, and we've looked at driving the consistency within lessons. And there's a lot of tangible things we can take away from this, from the principles to the actually technologies and the workflows that have been put into place. But why we need to do this is actually a much bigger, more important thing than I think is getting airtime for, and that's because the cracks in the system are now starting to show. So I think they've been there for a long time. They've been sort of, people who are close to education have been able to see them under the surface, but now they've really come to the fore, and there's real challenges within education. And I think these cracks are part of a bigger challenge, which I'm calling the coming earthquake. And this is because there's three big problems that are going to hit education, and they're going to hit at pretty much the same time. So the first challenge we've got is teacher shortages. So only today I read a report that there's a lack of school head teachers. Teachers don't want to step up into leadership anymore because of the challenges that go with running a school and the pressures on them. And at the other end of the spectrum, I know a lot of schools who have challenges getting actual teachers into the roles they've got. For a long time I worked across the north of England. I was working with schools who were getting, one or two at best responses for open positions they had, and I knew some schools who couldn't fill full-time positions and were having to rely on employing support staff, and the money it costs to have those people keep coming in. So teacher shortages is the big challenge. It's being talked about in the media, but it's really going to hit, and it's going to hit hard when it does. The second element is funding cuts. So, unless you've been living under a rock, then you know about the funding cuts. The Department for Education is it's putting huge pressure on schools, and that's because when we looked at it earlier, when you rely on school development, when you rely on employing more people, and you employ on buying more resources, then you need the funding to keep coming in and to keep going up as inflation increases and prices do. And once that funding stops increasing, you've got big problems, and this is what we're seeing right now, that we've got big problems because funding's being cut, and many school leaders are just not sure what to do. And then the third challenge, which is not really being spoke about at all, is that by 2023 there will need to be an additional 1 million places in primary schools because of the population boom that's happened in the last few years. And even if the government was to change its mind on the funding, and they were to build the schools that were needed and to put the funding in place, it brings us back to problem one, and the fact that there's a teacher shortage. So who's going to teach these children? It's just a real big challenge, and this is why technology has to be important, because people and resources are not enough. If you look at the last 5 years alone. So in terms of people, most schools now, their wage budget makes up almost 90% of their costs. In the last 5 years alone, the number of teaching assistants in school has doubled. It's gone from sort of 160,000 in UK education up to 340,000. I think it's at the moment, or around those numbers. As the challenges that have faced schools, one of the ways they've reacted is to bring in more teaching assistants, and with that, it increases the wage bill, and it drives those costs up for the school. And alongside that, we've had the resource boom. In the last 5 years, our UK schools have spent £1 billion on things like iPads and classroom technology, interactive whiteboards. And through that period, there's been no impact that's measurable, at least from a research point of view, that any of that technology, those iPads, those computers, those interactive whiteboards, have actually had any impact on student progress. So we've really got to embrace technology. People and resources are not enough. Technology is that pillar that's missing from our schools. And when we look at those examples today, that technology is not expensive, it's actually free. And the things that I've talked through are not actually that complex. They're quite straightforward. We're not trying to not trying to change everything that's happening in the school and become paperless, or this really high-tech environment where everyone has to work on a device at all times. It's just about very simple things, being able to digitally communicate with students, caption information digitally. If you want, you can mark and assess work digitally, which is, right back to the beginning of this webinar, that's what Broad Green did, and that impacted on reducing their mark and turnaround from 2 weeks to 2 days. It improved how often students and teachers could interact. And as a result of that, their GCSE performance improved 25% year on year. And then when we think of those challenges like funding cuts, technology allows us to do more with less. It allows us to save money. Most of the schools that I've worked with, they've gone on to save, 5-figure sums within a year of using technology effectively. Huge potential there. And then finally, when we look at the, teacher recruitment, well, it's no surprise that schools that invest heavily in technology and their staff can work in better ways, and the work-life balance is better, and they look to lessen the workload challenges. They're the schools who retain their staff, and they're the schools who staff want to work for. So when it comes to recruitment, it's not a big challenge for them. People want to work at those schools who look after them. And then all the other schools who do things the conventional way and are all paper-based and staff work 60 hours a week, they're the schools where staff are leaving. They're the schools where teachers don't want to go work. They're struggling to fill posts. And in the coming years, as teachers become more and more sparse, they're the schools who are really going to struggle. So technology has to be embraced. It's really, really important. And despite what might look like bad news here, we've got 3 big problems: teacher recruitment, we've got funding cuts, and we've got population boom. I actually believe there's never been a better time to be in education. And there's 3 reasons for this. So, portable low-cost devices. If you wanted to buy an iPad, a tablet, or something like a Chromebook, you can pick these devices up for like £180 now each. I remember when I was in school, it wasn't that long ago, I'm 30, that, 15 years ago, when schools wanted to build ICT suites, they had to go through the, Tesco vouchers for schools program, and we'd all collect, those vouchers, and out at the end of it, out of months and months of hundreds of kids collecting those vouchers, and the school still putting some money in, we'd have 30 computers to use in a school of 800 students. Now to get 30 computers into the hands of students, it can cost as little as £4,000. So there's huge potential there, to get devices into school and to do really interesting things with that. But, if you're bringing devices in, if you're buying these things, if you've got lots of iPads or tablets or laptops, then don't just use them for internet browsing. Don't just use them to complete work. Change what you're doing with them. And this brings us on to the second point. You can create bespoke learning content or experiences. You can go out and you can develop your own curriculum, or like we looked at the Mrs. O'Brien's Year 6 booster class, they created an environment which was bespoke for those students. So 10 students could communicate in a little community, and then the teachers were curating content for them, YouTube videos. What can happen and what can grow out of that is that teachers can go away and they can create their own videos, using Explain Everything or YouTube and stuff like that, and they can give them out to the students. Super simple. It's all free to do. The technology's there. All we need to do is to leverage it and start using it in the new ways that is beneficial. And then finally, you've got, you have these platforms and systems like Google Suite for Education, which I've talked about, that are completely free. And this is the part that's sort of insane. So if you were to go back sort of 15 years ago, if a school or a business would have wanted a platform like Google Suite for Education, you would be talking hundreds of thousands of pounds to build something like this because of the technology that's involved, And today, any school can sign up and any school can get this for free, And an interesting fact is that, so Google Suite for Education, whether you use it at the moment in school or whether you don't, when I give this talk at, trade shows and education shows, usually it's about 25 to 30% of the room who actually are familiar with Google Suite, and the rest are not using it. If you go to America or Australia, about 90% of their schools actually use Google Suite. What I found is that when I'm out and about, is that, sort of 70 to 90% of UK schools don't use it. And that's just crazy because we've got this incredibly powerful technology here that's available completely for free. And all we need to do is sign up on it and it's there to be used. And all those good things that we've looked at in this webinar, you can achieve that in your own school. So there's never been a better time to be in education. And you can start jumping right in and you can start using this stuff. But if you need a little bit more help, then one of the things we do, and if you want to learn a bit more about those case studies that we've talked about, is that, so through my work at LearnMaker, we run what we call the Accelerated School Improvement Program. So it's a 90-day program. Focuses on how to use Google Suite for Education, improves the capability of teachers, productivity of school, and the consistency of lessons. It's all about focus on saving the time and energy so that staff can get back to doing their best work. Along the way, a lot of schools save money, typically 30 to 50,000 pounds within 1 year, because the technology enables them to reduce their costs or stop other subscriptions or sort of ICT support costs that they have to pay. And then most importantly, it's about raising student progress and attainment. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. I believe it takes 12 to 24 months before, the new practices really start embedding in the school. But, like we saw with Broad Green, it's completely achievable. So within a year, they'd raise their GCSE maths students' progress by 25%. And that's huge. So if you'd like to know more about that, you can get in touch. To break it down further, so the program actually includes, so it's 8 really in-depth modules on how to get the best out of Google Suite for Education. So we looked at the principles here. So we've looked at capability, productivity, consistency. So this actually breaks down into key modules. So in capability, we look at standardization. So everyone's got, a really strong base to work from. We look at organization and how people can work in really easy ways. Everything's set up correctly. These tools are available to use. What we don't want is any technical headaches. It's about developing that resource bank, making sure they hit the expectations of the school leaders and where you want to go. Then in productivity, it's about driving that teamwork, enabling staff to work more collaboratively, to plan together, to drive the quality. It's all about lessening the amount of manual and administration work in information flow module. So technology picks that up, starts collating and collecting it automatically. Drive communication, so people can work together easier. Communication, some of the schools we work with, they've reduced the amount of emails they've had by 50% in the school. We don't want teachers spending time in their email box, we want them spending time with students. So we want to look at new ways that staff can communicate. And then finally, in the consistency principle, 2 modules, you've got to drive that transparency and you want continued development. So you don't want a situation where once the program stops or the work stops, the progress stops. in all the schools we work with, we give them the tools that they need to grow and continue onwards, and then they just continue. Their trajectory is always upwards, and that's because it's really key to embed that continued development. Program is 90 days. You work with leading experts. Got on-site training, you have online webinar support, and there's the e-learning portal wrapped around it. So you're fully supported through that change, and enables you to get the best out of their technology and really achieve your school's goals. If you want to learn some more, or generally if you just want to actually identify, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are in the school, then you can book a free discovery session. So this is a 60-minute meeting, and it's a deep dive into your school's development. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, whether in most schools I work with, is actually about knowing where to start. You've got a lot of plates in the air, you're spinning a lot of things. So taking on one more project, such as a technology project to improve your school, can feel like just one of too many things to do. So this is all about aligning it with your school goals. So can technology help you balance the 5 or 6 plates that you might be spinning? Can it help you more? Because that's what it should do. Technology should align with your goals, and it should help you achieve them quicker, easier, and faster. The other thing we'll do is that it helps you identify the obstacles that you need to overcome. So you've obviously got a strong vision of where you want to take your school, but the part that's often missing is how do you want to get there? And the first thing that you need to do is identify the obstacles and think about how you're going to overcome them. Because whether it's raising student attainment or a certain subject or whatever it might be, deploying technology, there's going to be challenges along the way. Because if there weren't, then everyone will do it and everyone will be getting 100% results. So second area is about identifying those obstacles that you need to overcome. And we can look at some ways on how Google Suite can help. And then finally, you'll leave with a plan of action, and you can begin putting it into practice the very next day if you want. So as we've looked at in this webinar, some very easy ways to begin jumping right into Google Suite. But in the discovery session, these things will actually be bespoke to your school. So they'll take your challenges, your obstacles, your visions and your dreams into example, and apply them to that situation. And from that, you've got a plan of action, you can put it into practice and then start making a big difference and driving your school improvement. And if you want to book that or you just want to find out more, then this is the site to go to. So www.learnmaker.co.uk/discovery-session. So just pop on there and you can book the details in, and a member of the team will get back to you. And then I just want to leave you with a final thing. And it's one of my favorite quotes. So Winston Churchill said, "We must take change by the hands, or rest assuredly, change will take us by the throat." And this is really interesting. So the schools that I've worked with who are embracing technology, they're not feeling the challenges of budget cuts, teacher recruitment challenges, government's changing targets. They don't feel them as hard as some other schools might do, because they've accepted that part of the change and they've taken it by the hand, and the technology is alleviating those pressures on them. It's enabling them to work faster. Staff have more time in these schools. These schools have more money, and the technology is impacted on student progress. So for them, change isn't as challenging. But then I meet other schools and they're fighting the change. They want to stick with the old ways, and I think this is you're fighting a losing battle. You can't stop the future. You can't fight change. The world as a whole is going through huge change at the moment, from our politics to our public services. But the reality is that we can't change it. The only thing that is a given is that things will change, and we can either adapt to them and look to thrive, or we can fight them and have a really hard time. And the big takeaway I think I will give anyone is that without technology, then you're really going to struggle. We live in a technological world. We can pull out a smartphone from our pocket. We can book a taxi, a flight, a hotel. We can catch up with friends on social media. We can watch videos, movies, read books. And this is all from the device in our pockets. But When you go into a school, everything's manual based, paper based, largely in conventional schools. Staff are working 60 hours a week. People are getting burnt out. They're leaving the profession. People don't want to join the profession. So how can there be such a gap between pulling a phone out of our pocket and having all this power to working in a school and having to do things manually, time intensively and stressfully? So we really must take change by the hand, and that means embracing technology in your school and putting those principles that we've looked at in this webinar into practice. And to leave you with the final thing, it's time to embrace technology, and it's time to accelerate your own school's improvement. So I want to thank you for logging on and being part of this webinar. And just final thing is that, book that discovery session. It's at the bottom of the screen. And we'll do some great work together. So that's all, folks. So embrace that technology, accelerate your own school's improvement, and, really excel. So thank you.